Hello everyone and welcome to the lesson. The subject is boardroom dynamics. We are studying governance structures, which we defined as a framework that specifies the distribution of rights and responsibilities among different stakeholders. That's the meaning of a governance structure. It is a framework that specifies the distribution of rights and responsibilities among different stakeholders, such as the shareholders, the managers, the board. It also spells out the rules and procedures for decision making in corporate affairs. A governance structure spells out the rules and procedures for decision making. Rules and procedures for what? For decision making. Today we want to study a committee structure. Committee structure. Candidates, a board committee is an important element in the governance process. It is what is a very important element because it is a decision-making body, a committee of the board. I repeat, candidates, a governance structure is a framework that does what? That specifies the distribution of rights and responsibilities among the different stakeholders in corporate affairs. It also spells out the rules and procedures for decision making in corporate affairs. So a committee is an important element of the governance process, and it should be established with clearly agreed reporting procedures. A committee should also have what we call a written scope of authority. Written scope of authority. The committee of the board. The board delegates certain functions to a well-structured committee, but without abdicating its own responsibilities. The board does what? The board delegates some of its functions to well-structured committees. And the board should ensure that there are written, properly written terms of reference, which should be reviewed annually. The terms of what? The terms of reference. The terms of reference should be reviewed annually by the board, should be reviewed and approved by the board every year. And any changes that are made after the review must be approved by the board. And these terms of reference should include terms of reference of a committee, should include the terms of reference of a committee should include one, its composition, the composition of the committee. That has to be included in the terms of reference. Objectives of the committee, the functions should also be included in the terms of reference. What is the purpose of the committee? Delegated authority, delegated what? Delegated authority, including the extent of power to make decisions. Because the board, the committee performs the functions, certain functions delegated to it by the board. So part of the terms of reference should be the specific delegated authority, including the extent of the power to make decisions or recommendations or both. Tenure. Should be include also the tenure. What is the period within which the committee is to operate, the duration. There ought to be also reporting framework. The reporting what? The reporting framework or mechanism to the board. Committees report to the board. So there ought to be reporting mechanism to the board. Reporting what? Reporting mechanism to the board. So the terms of reference should include composition, objectives, functions, delegated authority, tenure, reporting framework or reporting mechanism. Reporting mechanism. So candidates, committees should be appropriately constituted. Composition. They should be what? Committees should be appropriately constituted. And while constituting committees, there has to be consideration. They should be appropriately constituted considering any relevant legislation and the objectives of the company. There ought to be reference to any legislation to that effect. What does legislation say about a composition of the committee? When setting up the committee, reference must be made to various laws that guide composition of committees. That could be the Articles of Association, the Companies Law, and such like provisions. Consideration of any relevant legislation. You need also to consider what are the objectives of the company. When constituting a committee, it's important to take into consideration the objectives of the company. And candidates, the boards of all other companies, the boards of companies should include what we call the audit committee. And define its composition, its authority, its purpose, its duties in the memorandum of incorporation. And candidates, board committees other than the risk management committee should only comprise members of the board and should have a majority of non-executive directors. The majority of the non-executive directors should be chaired. The majority, I'm saying, of the non-executive directors serving on such committees should be independent. Independent non-executive directors should sit on the risk management committee, on the audit committee, and so on. The committee should be what? Should be chaired by independent non-executive directors. Very important. Board committees. We may also have external parties, such as paid advisors, who may be present at committee meetings, and that has to be done only by invitation. But such advisors do not vote in committees, in board committees. So other than the non-executive, independent non-executive directors who should sit on these committees, while carrying out its functions, may invite paid advisors who are not allowed to vote on the committee. So these are some of the terms of reference. I've also made some comment on committees. I've said that it's important for a company to have a risk management committee, which should comprise of independent non-executive directors. Committee should be appropriately constituted composition. So I've also mentioned that committees should be chaired by independent non-executive directors, apart from the executive committee, which is ordinarily chaired by the CEO. I've also mentioned something on the advisors or experts who should attend as independent contractors and not as members of the committee. The executive directors, candidates, and senior management may be invited to attend committee meetings if the chairman of the committee considers their input and contribution to be of value to the decision-making process in the committees. And the respective committee chairman should give at least an oral summary of their committee's deliberations at the board meetings following the committee meeting. And the minutes of committee meeting proceedings should be included in the board pack for board's information as soon as they have been approved. It's important. It's a good practice, because remember, directors rely on information that is provided by the committees, by the management, in order to process the information before conducting meetings. So it's important that immediately after the meetings have been approved, they should be made available to the directors as soon as they have been approved. And the board should critically apply its collective mind to the recommendations of committees. And while deliberating, the committee members should adopt an independent mind, should have a mind to take, to make independent decisions. So board committee should be free to take independent. Also, they should be free to take independent outside professional advice. Other than relying on their own independence, they are free to seek for independent advice from outside professionals. And that has to be within the scope of their terms of reference. And it has to be at the cost of the company, subject to a proper process being followed. And candidates, every director will normally be entitled to attend committee meetings for the purpose of gaining information relating to the company and its business. All right? However, unless the director is a member of the committee, the director will not be entitled to participate in the proceedings without the consent of the chairman, and will not have a vote in such a committee. But directors who wish to attend the meetings in such circumstances should follow the process established by the board. So when committees are meeting, the other directors are free to attend such meetings, but due process has to be followed. The chairman also has to approve such attendance. So that is something to do with the professionals. Said experts can attend meetings, but that has to be at the invitation of the company. And when they attend meetings, it has to be as independent contractors and not as members of the committee. The executive directors and the senior management have also said may be invited to attend committee meetings if the chairman of the committee considers their input to be of importance to the meetings. Candidates, we are studying committee structure. So candidates, let's move on and discuss some of these committees, starting with the nomination committee. This is a subcommittee of the board. Nomination committee. Nomination what? Committee. What is the composition and functions of the nomination committee? Candidates, the role of the nomination committee is to review on regular basis the composition of the full board, and where it appears that the board is lacking in skills or expertise in a certain area, the committee can identify how best to rectify the situation. Okay? The nomination committee. The role I'm saying of the nomination committee is to review on regular basis the composition of the full board. Role is to review on regular basis the composition of the full board. To review on regular basis the composition of the full board. And where it appears that the board is lacking in skills or expertise in a certain area, at a later point in this course, we will study what we call director competencies and skills. And we learn that for, this is director competencies and skills. We learned that for a board to effectively carry out its mandates, the directors who sit on a board should possess certain competencies and skills. We shall study the various skills under knowledge, under skills, and also the mindset. What kind of mindset should a board have? What nature of competencies should a director possess? So the nomination committee should on a regular basis review the composition of the board. The committee should also check that identify if there is any shortage of skills on the board or experience in a certain area on the board. So the purpose is not just to identify the gaps, but also to make recommendations on how to rectify the situation of the gaps. And that may involve identifying skills that are required. So another role is to identify required skills. Identify required skills. To identify the required skills on the board. To identify the required skills on the board. And also those individuals best suited to bring the skills on the board. And candidates, if you are conversant with the King's report on governance, it suggests that the committee should only comprise members of the board. Should do what? Should only comprise the members of the board. And the majority of the members should be non-executive directors, of which the majority should be independent. The majority of the members who sit on the nomination committee should be independent, non-executive directors. And the ideal situation is for the chairperson of the board to also chair the nomination committee. So the chair of the board, the ideal situation is that the chair of the board should be the one who chairs the nomination committee. All right? Do you understand? That's the King's report. That's recommendation from the King's report. That the chair of the nomination committee should also be the chair of the board, the chairman of the board. The majority of the members should be independent non-executive directors. If the chairman of the board is not the committee chair, then the chair should be an independent non-executive director. All right? We are discussing the composition and the functions of the nomination committee. Candidates, this committee is empowered to consider the size and the balance of the full board. Consider the size and balance of the full board. The nomination committee is empowered to consider the size and the balance. The size and the balance. The size and the balance of the full board, and to make recommendation where, in the opinion of its members, improvements should be made to the board. If there is any imbalance, then this committee should make recommendations on how to correct the problem. On how to do what? To correct the problem. And it remains the responsibility of the full board of directors to consider the recommendations made and to vote on any nominated appointments, or the case may be even suggested removals. The committee can also suggest removals of certain directors from the board, so that it remains the duty of the board to consider such recommendations. And one of the important considerations for the committee is whether there are adequate succession plans in place to mitigate the effect of losing key members of the board. Succession planning. Succession what? Succession planning. Because losing a key member of the board can have a negative impact on the performance of the board and the company as a whole. So it is the role of the nomination committee to put in place measures, mitigation, so that if there is a key member of the committee who may cease from operating as a member, there has to be succession plans in place to mitigate the effects of losing such a key member of the board, specifically the non-executive directors. All right, who may be very difficult to replace than the executive directors who have followed a certain career, defined career path through the management of the company. So candidate is easy to replace the executive directors because of the pool that is present within the company. But getting a replacement for an independent non-executive director is not easy. So it is the role of the nomination committee to put in place measures to mitigate the effects of losing key members of the board, specifically the non-executives, because such individuals may not be easy to replace them. succession planning. Candidates, the role again of the nomination committee may be extended to also consider the skill, the experience, and succession planning with respect to the executive management team. So succession planning may be extended other than the succession planning of the board, but also succession planning of the executive team. Succession planning, page 2. They also have a role to play in succession planning of the executive team, the management team. This is succession planning of the board. They can make recommendations. They can help in succession planning when it comes to the management team. All right? The role of the nomination committee, I repeat, may be extended to also consider the skill, the experience, and succession planning with respect to the management, executive management team. Executive management team. Executive management team. So candidates, let's discuss the next committee, which is a remuneration committee. Remuneration committee. Remuneration committee. Remuneration committee. Candidates, the remuneration of company directors is one of the most sensitive and topical issues facing board of directors today. Today, I mean 2022, all right? Today is on 10th of March 2022. So the remuneration of company directors is one of the most sensitive. It is one of the most topical issues that face the board of directors. And it is therefore considered a crucial element of good corporate governance. It is what? It is considered a crucial element of good corporate governance to establish a committee whose sole focus is to consider the level and form of directors' remuneration. Given that, candidates, this is a sensitive matter, it is a good practice, it's a good corporate governance practice to establish a committee whose sole focus is to consider the and recommend the level and form of directors' remuneration. And what does the King's report on governance say or suggest? Candidates, the King's report on governance suggests that the committee should only comprise members of the board. And the majority of the members should be non-executive, of which the majority should be independent. So the majority of members who sit on this committee, we are talking about composition, should be independent majority, independent non-executive directors. Independent non-executive directors. And they should comprise members of the board. Number one, they should be members of the board. Number two, they should be the independent non-executive members of the board. And candidates, the chair of the board should not chair the remuneration committee. The chair of the board should not chair the remuneration committee. The chair of the board should not chair the remuneration committee. Here we saw that the chair of the board can also chair the nomination committee. That should not be the case when it comes to the remuneration committee. The chairman of the committee should be an independent non-executive person or director. The chair of the board should not chair the remuneration committee, but may be a member in this committee. But this chairman of the board can be a member of the remuneration committee, can be a member, but cannot be the chairman of the remuneration committee. And candidates, one of the most important responsibilities of the members of the committee is to remain up to date on appropriate levels, structuring methods and types of remuneration in the environment in which the company operates. That's the main responsibility. It has to remain up to date. Up to date on what? Up to date on the appropriate levels, up to date on the structuring methods, up to date on the types of remuneration in the environment in which the company operates. That's the main responsibility of the remuneration committee. Among other responsibilities, that's the main, one of the major responsibilities. Remuneration committee. Then candidates, audit committee. Audit what? Audit committee. Audit committee. Candidates, the board should ensure that the company has an effective and independent audit committee. An independent audit committee fulfills a vital role in corporate governance. The audit committee, candidates, is vital to, among other things, ensure the integrity of integrated reporting and internal controls. To ensure what? Integrity of integrated reporting. To ensure integrity of integrated. To ensure the integrity of integrated reporting and internal financial controls systems. Internal financial control systems. All right? And also to identify and manage financial risks. Manage risks. Identify and what? And manage risks. Now, the board, candidates, and management of any company, regardless of size, should be fully committed to the goal of supporting and maintaining an effective audit committee. And the board should approve a written terms of reference for the audit committee, which should inform its agenda and work plan to ensure that all the audit committee's recommendations are addressed in each financial year. The audit committee chairman candidate should, in consultation with the company secretary, decide the frequency and timing of meetings. Frequency and timing of what? Of meetings, such that the audit committee should meet as frequently as is necessary to perform its functions, but should meet at least twice a year, at least 2 times a year. And reasonable time should be allocated for all audit committee meetings. The audit committee should meet at least once a year with external and internal auditors without management being present. We said they should meet at least twice a year, the committee. But at least once a year, this committee should meet with the internal and external auditors, but in the absence of the management. And there should be separate meetings. All right? Separate meetings. When the board meets, should eat separately. When it's meeting, these external auditors should be separate when it meets the internal auditors. And the audit committee members should be suitably skilled and experienced independent non-executive directors. Independent non-executive directors, highly experienced, highly skilled in financial matters. All right? Independent, experienced, non-executive directors. And this committee should constitute at least 3 members. At least 3 members. At least 3 members should sit on this committee. That means not less than 3. Should be 3 and above. Should not be 2 or 1. And who should chair this committee? Your guess is as good as mine. This committee should be chaired by an independent non-executive director. Independent non-executive director. It should be chaired by an independent non-executive director. So I've said chairman should be independent, should be an independent non-executive director. And this chairman must be appointed by the board. Appointed by the board. In some committees, the members elect a chairman among themselves. This should not be the case for an audit committee. And an audit committee's chairman should be independent and should be appointed by the board. The board should appoint the chairman of the audit committee. And candidates, the chairman of the board has a strategic and comprehensive role to play in guiding the board and cannot simultaneously lead and participate objectively in an audit committee. And therefore, the chairman of the board should not be eligible for appointment as an audit committee member, but may attend audit committee meetings. And that has to be by invitation. This is not the case here. We said here that the chairman of the board can as well be a member of a nomination committee. And here the chairman of the board can as well be a chairman of this nomination committee. The nomination committee, we say that the chairman of the board should chair the remuneration committee. Here, the chairman of the board cannot be the chairman of the audit committee, neither can he or she be a member of this committee, but the chairman of the board is allowed to attend meetings, but via the invitation. He must be invited. He cannot just come and attend. No, he has to be invited to attend meetings held by the audit committee. He is not eligible for appointment as an audit committee member, but may attend audit committee meetings by invitation. It's a very important committee, this one. That's why we are going on page number 3 to put down some of the statutory responsibilities or statutory duties of the audit committee. 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 What are the statutory duties of the audit committee? Now, candidates, the statutory duties of the audit committee include making submissions to the board regarding the company's accounting policies. Making submissions to the board in relation to accounting policies. These are company accounting policies, financial controls, the committee should make submissions in relation to financial controls, records, and reporting. Making submissions to the board regarding the company's accounting policies, financial controls, records, and reporting. The second statutory duty is to nominate an auditor that the audit committee regards as independent. Nominate company auditor. It is the duty of the audit committee to nominate an auditor whom the committee deems to be independent. An auditor the audit committee considers as independent. Then it is the role of this committee to determine the audit fee. This is fee that is paid to this auditor. The audit fee should be determined by the audit committee. Determine the audit fee. Next is in relation to appointment of the auditor. The audit committee should ensure that the appointment of the auditor complies with the Companies Act. Appointment, ensure that the appointment of the auditor complies with the Companies Act. Because external auditors should be appointed the appointment or candidates of an auditor is a legal requirement. The law states clearly the process, what has to be done. So it is the role of the audit committee to ensure that all the provisions of the law have been complied when appointing the company's auditor. That is the Companies Act and any other relevant legislation. There is also non-audit services. They have a role to play when it comes to non-audit services. Non-audit services. It is the role or the duty of the audit committee to determine the nature and the extent of non-audit services. Non-audit services. So there are other duties, candidates like preparing a report to include in the annual financial statements, describing how the committee carried out its functions, stating whether the auditor was independent, and commenting on the financial statements, commenting on accounting practices, commenting on the internal financial control measures of the company, and so on. It is also the role of the audit committee to receive and deal with the relevant complaints and any other function designated by the board. Receive complaints. If there are any complaints from stakeholders, like the shareholders, like the employees, the government, then it is the role of the audit committee to receive such complaints. This audit committee can also perform any other role that is designated by the board. So candidates, we have discussed 3 important committees of the board, beginning with the nomination committee, the remuneration committee, and the audit committee. It's important to state that these are not the only committees that a board can constitute. There are other committees like the risk management committee, we have the executive committee, and many other type of committees. But today we discussed only 3 under the topic committee structure. And we began by stating that when constituting committees, it is important that the board puts in writing the terms of reference, which should include terms of reference for the committees should include the composition, the objectives, functions, purposes, and delegated authority, the tenure of the committee, and also the reporting mechanism of the committee. So thank you for your time. I hope to meet you in our next session. I remain truly yours, Philip Ndeda Sagwa. Bye-bye.